Good morning. We are live. Coffee with Rich. This morning I'm doing round two with my good friend Jason Brown. And before we get started, as folks are starting to jump on, let me remind you about some of our amazing sponsors, man. We've got the American Warrior Society.com for all your self-defense needs. Looking for low light, how to win the low light fight? It's in there. American Warrior Society.com. Want to know weapons retention? Maybe you're interested in a white belt to blue belt training track in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. It's in there. Want to know about how to master the carbine? It's in there. Want all the books that Mike Seeklander has ever written? We have downloadable PDFs on everything he's ever written available for AmericanWarriorSociety.com. So please check us out there. Take a 14-day free trial on Mike and I. We also have amazing sponsors like Century Martial Arts, makers of the Bob XL, the strike trainer that Mike and I use, APP Hemp for the finest CBD products money can buy, Cool Fire Trainer. And again, all these sponsors will again be in today's show notes. The Cool Fire Trainer takes that dry fire training to the next level right now, as you know, and Jason knows. Ammo prices are astronomical, man. So you can do yourself a huge favor by doing some training at home with the Cool Fire Trainer. Mountain Man Medical, man. Mike Seekler and I, in conjunction with Justin Carroll, my good friend, former MARSOC operator, and Brian McLaughlin over there at Mountain Man Medical, we have put together a American Warrior Society branded trauma kit that's going to be coming out very soon. Please stay tuned for that. Precision Holsters, maker of the Precision Holsters belt that I'm wearing right now that's keeping my pants up, as well as the Ultra Appendix holster. And you know what? I was doing some draws with that thing yesterday, Jason, and it is absolutely an amazing piece of kit. And I look back to some of the other holsters I used decades ago, and that Precision Holsters, man, is far and away an amazing piece of gear. So please check out all of our amazing sponsors. Click the link below to find out more, and they are on the AmericanWarriorShow.com. We have discounts for everybody watching today. Thanks for coming on the show, Jason. We got 17 folks watching us, man.
I'm happy to be here again. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, thank you, sir. We've got Robert Bird on. He says, good morning. JD Helly, my good friend, says, good morning, gents. Dan out there in Flowery Branch, Georgia, coin number 1968C. When you become a coin member of the American Warrior Society, you get your own unique coin. I see you digging for yours, Jason.
Yeah. Oh, it's out of reach. Reach it.
You know, it's funny. People are like, Rich, you have these amazing guests, man. I said, most of them are my friends and members of the American Warrior Society. So all I'm doing is showcasing some of the amazing talent that we have as members. Tiny
Yeah,
is on. Will Parker is on. Howard is on. Johnny King says, good morning from Blue Grass Army Depot. Wow. Good morning. Terry is on. Jay, my good friend out in Hawaii. Good morning, Jay. It's really early where you are, sir. Walt, John, Mark, PJ, Tahoe. Good morning. Elkie says, good morning, Mr. Brown. Coin number 1307. JD says, why aren't you fishing? I'm not a fisherman. Jason, are you a fisherman?
don't let my grandpa hear me. No, not really. I used to be with him, but my daughter got the gene. Unfortunately, I can't beat her. So,
It's funny, man. There's almost nothing I hate worse than fishing. I would rather take. I don't have the patience for it. Sit there and stare at the water for hours and the heat and the bugs. No thanks.
Yeah.
So let's get into the show, Jason. I want to read your bio just briefly and then remind folks to go back and watch the first show we did together. So here's the bio of Jason today. Jason is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, having served from August 1989 through July of 1993. During those 4 years, he didn't miss much. Chronologically participated in Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, the military response to the 1992 LA riots, which we may be going back to again, by the way.
Yeah.
He was also attached to Joint Task Force North, then JTF 6, for operations on our southern border, fighting illegal immigration. Once again, we may be going back there very soon. And then he was involved in the early months of Operation Restore Hope in Somalia. While he had several opportunities to make an impact in his short military career, it was ultimately the engagement Hjul during Desert Storm, chronicled in David Morse's excellent book, The Storm on the Horizon, that would have the longest impact on him. After the Marine Corps, Jason cultivated a career in information technology, helped build a small but wonderful family, and returned to his love of shooting as both competitor and instructor. He lives in Missouri with his wife and 2 children and can be often found chasing after the top spot and IDA matches in the Midwest. Good morning, brother.
Good morning. Thanks. I don't think, oops, I think we got a little, there we go. Sorry. Get the camera set up. Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me on again. I think you pretty much covered everything. Anything that wasn't covered, I'm not sure I want to tell anybody.
Well, hopefully the statute of limitations has already run out, so you're okay.
Several statutes of limitations have probably run out now. Time is tough.
Yeah, so if you missed the first show, I would really encourage you. It was an incredibly popular show. It's trending incredibly well on the back end numbers of our podcast. You can go and listen to the podcast, or I've provided a link below to the first show that we did with Jason. It's really tragic telling, and it took a lot of, it was a pretty emotional story. And I just love you sharing it with, I think I listened to it twice, Jason. It was a great show.
I'm glad to get the story out. There was a long time, we went a really long time without having a medium to get the official story of what really happened. Because, if you've been in the military, well, I don't even know that it's necessarily unique to the military, but the larger an organization gets, the further away from, I'm trying to be diplomatic here, the further away from detail the official record becomes, or accurate, like ground level detail. And so for a long time, the story of that particular story indicated maybe some fault on the part of the Marines who were lost, specifically the vehicle commander, Ismail Kodo. And it frustrated a lot of us, I think, that we didn't know how to make that story public. And David Morse did a great job. He tried to present, if you've not read the book, he tries to present all aspects of the story as best he can and not give necessary weight to any one particular stream of consciousness, but he tries to expose as many memories of the event as possible. But that's the closest we've come to a large audience truth telling of that night. So being able to tell it again on your show, maybe expose it to some more folks, it's important to us.
Well, I'm honored to helped in the sharing of that, because it's a story that needs to be told, man. A lot of young men gave their lives on that night in that battle, and they need to be remembered for the sacrifices that they and their family made. So, yes. And that's what I like about having people like you on the show, man, because like you said, Jason, that's a great point, that these stories aren't often told. Sometimes the military will intentionally hide these stories.
Absolutely.
Or
friendly fire too.
Yeah, especially. Yeah. And if they put together an official narrative, like I've got the 2nd Marine Division's narrative, historical narrative for Desert Storm. And Jason, it's like that thick. I'm like, that's it? A pamphlet? That's all you got to say?
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, I lived long enough to watch one of my children go through history class and be exposed to it for like 15 minutes in one of their American history class courses. And I'm not suggesting it warrants more than that in the grand scheme of things, but to see it distilled down to its most basic and perhaps not entirely true, I don't know. There's so many truths, but the truth that was on the ground with all the guys who deployed there, and there was a ton of us, right? I mean, there was a lot, pretty much the entire deployable part of the American military machine was over there at one point or another, and but that truth is different than the one that got us there, and it was interesting to hear her. Oh yeah, that's the time we went in the desert and kicked everybody out of Kuwait. Like, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's true. It's missing something.
Yeah. So if you're just joining us today, on today's show, we're going to talk about Jason's time in Somalia. We're going to talk about operations during the LA riots. We're going to talk about fighting illegal immigration on the southern border when he was with the Joint Task Force 6. So, got a lot of ground to cover today. I want you to hit that share button so that others can get this information. It's a unique story. And like I said, we're seeing some of the history repeat itself. You know, this is LA riots were 1992, and here we are 29 years later. And I would say that, in my humble opinion, in my 51 years on this planet, you know, race relations right now probably are at an all-time low. As sad as that is for all of us. Mike Seeklander is on. Mark Hamilton is on. Derek says, Fruit Warehouse, Mogadishu, good times. It sounds like Derek would know, I would
Yeah,
imagine.
he was with me. Yeah, absolutely, he would. Uh, I forgot. Yeah, I forgot what we called that place. Um, it's interesting. We had without skipping too far ahead, we got to most of the guys who got to Somalia were Desert Storm vets, and so Derek I served with from Desert Storm all the way through. We went to the right. We went to the riots. We went to uh, went to JTF 6, and then we did Somalia together. So and there was a lot of us like that, right? There's a lot of cohesion through those 4 years. We all saw some pretty strange things, but it was good because modern military deployment. I don't know if it's necessarily 100% true, but it seems like you don't get to carry that kind of continuity with people across units, across deployments, like we did in that Marine Corps back then.
Yeah, interesting point. So, thank you to the 31 folks that are joining us live. Please check out Coffee with Rich as a YouTube channel if you want to watch these episodes on your smart TV in the comfort of your own home. That's cool, man. You can watch all the previous episodes there on YouTube. Please
Yeah.
subscribe. Um, I want to start, I guess, with where we left off. You know, you come home, Desert Storm's over. It was a huge victory. What happens next?
So it was an uneventful return for the most part. We all came back in different waves, and the Marine Corps honestly didn't know what to do at that point. There was like this organizational boredom um, that set in, and rules were fairly lax. It was just a weird period of time. There was I don't remember I don't remember much for about 3 or 4 months, maybe even longer, as far as military structure goes. Everything was people were scattered all over the globe. So it probably took, like I said, about 6 months for things to return back to Marine Corps normal. I was a Lance Corporal at the time. Everybody back from their deployment and all the equipment back. And things went right back to what they had been before, which was, spend all day at the armory cleaning rifles that you hadn't shot in months, and PT, and that's all the budget that we had. Now, if I remember correctly, when we so when oh yeah, we started cycling once we got back to garrison, everything started getting normal. We started cycling through the usual business of people trying to go for meritorious promotion, the rifle range. We were in Camp Pendleton. We shot, I believe it was the Wilcox range. Um, Small little story there. I was part of First Light Armored Infantry Battalion. It was still LAI Battalion. We go to the range, the 500 the known distance range, and when if you don't know anything about military qualification, at least back then, Marine Corps qualification, your better shooters would shoot in the morning. If you pre-qualified high, then they'd give you the windless morning to try and maximize your score. And so after you shoot in the morning, you'd go back into what we called the butts, which is where you ran the targets up and down for the people who are shooting. So Wilcox range is like 140 lanes, shooting lanes wide. And because the center of the line was where the range officers were, they always stacked everybody from the center out. So you always ended up with, depending on how many people were shooting at the range, empty lanes on the left and on the right. And so I was like on the first or second lane that was being used. So I think like 13. And you're waiting for people that go between 100, 200, 200, 300 yards, and it gets pretty boring. So I took the back of three targets, and I spray painted LAI on them, and I ran them up on 3 unused lanes down at the front of the range, and immediately got my battalion kicked off the range. Right, the whole thing shut us down, and they stopped the force of fire for everybody, even the other units that were on there. Kicked the LAI battalion off the range, and I had to become notorious to my company commander or my battalion commander. That turned into a meritorious promotion in the Marine Corps way, and I became a corporal. So as soon as that happened, as an 0352, it became, as soon as that happened, I got put through career planner school, and then orders came down for Okinawa for 0352s. And I did not want to go to Okinawa. This was April of 1992. Going backwards, the Desert Storm was so the tow weapon system was so popular in Desert Storm. It was still the only weapon system with ground-mounted thermal imaging. Right, we didn't have universal thermal imaging on the ground. They had decided that they were going to start bringing tows to the regular line companies and battalions. So they had this idea in their head of a heavy weapons platoon in a weapons company of a regular infantry battalion, in this case, 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines. And they came to us as an opportunity to start that. And so I, along with Battalion Corporal Mia, Derek, and a bunch of other guys, all jumped ship from LAI to go to 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines. And as that process was starting to happen, they acquitted 4 police officers in LA for the beating of Rodney King. And that was probably, I guess, somewhere around April 26th, 25th, something like that. So right in the middle of all this process, I just got promoted. We just got orders. We're building this 3-9 new platoon while we're still in LAI battalion. And at the same time, LAI battalion's merging with 1st Recon Battalion. There's a whole lot of stuff going on right then. And this happens, and word comes down that we're all going to LA, or at least some of us are going to LA to try and quell the uprising. That's as far as we understood. What it really meant by the time we got there was that we were going to stay on fire watch over federal government funded properties, hospitals. In my case, it was my squad primarily guarded housing projects. But that's what we were doing. We're heading up, jumping our LAVs, big impressive show as we drove north from San Diego, northern San Diego, up to Los Angeles.
So, just backing up a little bit, you didn't want to go to Okinawa. I didn't want to go. Nobody wants to go to Okinawa, especially as an infantryman. A life at Kadena for the Air Force might be good on Okinawa, but for the rest of us grunts, man, life is, for me, was absolutely miserable.
How long were you there?
Just 6 months, long enough. Yeah. 6 days, 6 hours. I mean, the scuba diving was cool. I got in great shape. I finally got the sexy 6-pack that I always wanted because there's nothing else to do. But so let's go back to the Rodney King thing happens. The officers are acquitted. You guys get your orders. You go up there. What did LA look like as you approached?
So by the time we were getting there, there was, I forget what they said. There was an average of, I was watching a documentary maybe it was a year or two ago, and they said something like within 48 hours, something like twice as many structure fires had been lit or something like that. And I don't remember seeing any particular fire, but you do see as you're approaching LA, there was smoke in the distance. You mean there were fires, but there was I didn't have any direct, I couldn't tell you where they were, and we were riding on the highway. LAVs are pretty awesome. We're doing highway speed, and nobody really cared that we were standing on top of them, almost on top of them. The gunners' turrets, you're sticking out from above, below the waist up. Really cool view of the world, but again, I couldn't have pinpointed anything. So it was nothing like, for instance, when we went into Kuwait, right, where you could see this burning black smoke fires over. It wasn't quite like that, but you could tell there were fires. And traffic, I don't remember how far we got before the the California Highway Patrol had shut down the highway for oncoming traffic. Like people weren't getting able to get back on. I don't remember when that happened. One of the other guys might, but we eventually got there. We peeled off south of LA proper. In fact, we ended up in northern Long Beach. That's where we did all of our um, almost all of our patrols. If you don't know, Los Angeles is the largest. I mean, it's so sprawling. It's kind of hard without being a native to really understand where LA begins and ends. But northern Long Beach, which is its own city, is borders South Central, for instance, Los Angeles, right? So when you talk about Long Beach as a whole, it's just south of Los Angeles, but northern Long Beach and South Central Los Angeles share a imaginary line. Uh, and I'm going to forget the name of that road, but it's a road. So yeah, and then eventually, I mean, almost immediately when we got there, we went to a staging area, which was some kind of, someone else is going to remember this better. I don't know if it was like a police parking lot or a field next to maybe an airport. I can't really remember. And then from there, we left our LAVs there and we took 5-ton trucks into town and ended up bivouacking in a parking structure in northern Long Beach.
Now, did you guys have live ammunition at that point? Did anybody in your battalion or unit have live ammo?
We did, and we weren't allowed at the time. It was still magazines out. So, um, so a typical loadout for us back then was 210 rounds of ammunition. Right, we had the six, the two 3-pack magazine carriers, and then one X, which most often we just stick inside of our armor. We had, so as LAV crewmen, we had the flak jackets that are issued to all infantry, but we also had the vehicle soft body armor. Have you seen those? Right, the Velcro on. There's a little small panel soft body armor, and whenever we had the opportunity to use those, instead we did. But you could just stick a magazine inside the chest right here. It wouldn't go anywhere, and if you needed it, you could get it really quick. We didn't have what they have now with PALS webbing or any of that fun stuff. As close as we could get to high speed load drag.
So what, for those that are watching, the 34 folks that are watching this morning, hey, thank you and welcome to Coffee with Rich. I'm speaking to Jason Brown, former Marine competitive shooter. Of course, I'm Rich Brown, co-host, co-founder of the American Warrior Society and the American Warrior Show. And today we're talking about the LA riots. And Jason is telling us how, he arrives in Los Angeles. He can see fires in the distance. They give you live ammo. And that must have been pretty wild because last time you were probably issued live ammo, you're about to invade a country. And now here you are in Los Angeles, loading up live rounds into a magazine against American citizens. What's that like?
So that's a great point. And at the time, it wasn't necessarily. Yeah, the Marine Corps is really weird, right? We had been a peacetime Marine Corps, I think, really since, well, so there's Panama, which happened like right before Desert Storm, right? 89. And then before that it was Grenada, right? And there wasn't really a whole lot that went on, at least for conventional units. I don't know what the bad boys were doing, but for regular Marine Corps guys, there wasn't a lot going on. So there was that, and even Grenada was a short op. So basically, peacetime Marine Corps, we have a 7-month ish deployment, combative deployment, we'll call it, and then we're back to not knowing the new normal. There's the drawdown. We've changed people now, and we're getting ready to change people. Everything's weird. When we got issued live rounds again, for the guys who had already been to Saudi, we had the same problem over there, that we got the ammo, but maybe you shouldn't use it because we still had this whole legacy infrastructure of peacetime Marine Corps chain of command who were like, well, you got to be accountable for every round you fire. And as an instructor, obviously we tell that to our friends now. If you're going to carry a firearm, remember there's a lawyer behind every bullet you're shooting. So it's the same kind of mentality, but it's kind of dangerous when you're in a military posture. So when we got the ammo, the first thing that goes through everybody's head is, okay, we better not use any of this, because we're going to be in trouble if we do. Um, and we had no sense, zero sense. And for the most part, I think most of the guys I went with it from our unit never really got the dirty, gritty, face-to-face confrontation stuff that some of the military guys got and all the police got while they were in the LA riots, right? We didn't, we get that, but for the most part, our time there was a dog and pony show. Not entirely, but mostly. And allowing police officers to go do other stuff by making sure that a certain, terrain denial essentially. So, but I do remember one time we were sitting in our 5 tons and we're getting ready. It's nighttime. And man, I remember this pretty vividly, but I don't remember exactly how it went. But there was somebody, either a police officer or some other highly overly motivated individual, walking around the 5 tons. We were getting a police escort to get deployed to our where we were going to be patrolling, and somebody said they yelled out and just "I'll give you $100 for every gangbanger you shoot," or whatever. And there was at least, myself included, there was at least 3 of us I remember that said, "We're not here to shoot Americans. We're not. That's not what we do, right? You have to hire different guys for that." But I mean, most of us didn't even know really what. Man, I can't explain the. You were in during this time, so you probably had the same thing. Just boredom. I can't even. Boredom's the wrong word for it, but sort of disconnectedness to everything after coming back from Desert Storm and trying to go back into peacetime stuff. And it was just almost like that. Malaise is also too strong of a word. I don't know how to explain it.
Do you know what the word ennui means?
I've heard it before, but no.
Yeah, it's a French word, ennui, Ennui, and that is bored annoyance. And
Yes.
that's a lot of Marines will talk about that general malaise or ennui that is often felt. And yeah, Tiny's asking a good question that I also had, and that is, what was your ROE at that time, Jason?
So if I remember, and Derek might be able to correct me for some of this, but our primary purpose was to deny rioters access to, in our case, the housing projects at Villa Wanda and Orange in northern Long Beach called Carmelitos. So we controlled access in and out of Carmelitos, and we enforced the curfew, right? So, but we never had to. Well, I'll tell you a perfect example. Across the street, there was some rioters that burned down a gas station, and we were told distinctly that's someone else's problem, right? You're not fixing problems you see; you're fixing problems that come to you only, right? And so there was a story that floated around, and I don't even know if it's true. I'll never know if it's true, but where it was either you hear Marines, I'm sure the National Guard guys, because there's a big National Guard presence there too, hear the same story, but with National Guard people too, where 2 police officers, you were always with police officers. Police officers were always with us. It may only be 2. In some cases, it might be 10. There might be several cars with us, but our job there, we were heavyweight muscle for them. So if they needed assistance, we were there for it. If we needed to make an arrest, they were there for it, right? There was never, I might have lost you. Hopefully I didn't lose me. Can anyone, are you still there, Rich? Well, I'm going to continue with the ROE question in case I am actually still on. I don't remember the official rules of engagement. When we went to Somalia, we got like a sheet of paper with the ROE on it. Honestly, I can't really remember that, but what was on it exactly either. But all I remember was that it felt like we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants. And boy, this is going to be problematic. And so it was common sense, do it to kind of support the police however you can. We have Rich a minute. I don't even know if I'm the one that's still on or not.
Hello.
Hey, okay, so I don't know if I was on the whole time or not, but
Way to keep it
welcome back.
exciting.
So,
Heather says, you're on, but Rich is frozen and gone. I tell you what,
man.
guys, sorry about this. It's I had Todd Fox on the show. He was Madonna's bodyguard, and I think you and I were talking about him before the show. And he said it's all about trade-offs, Rich. You live in the country and you get all the benefits, but you also got some Wi-Fi problems.
Yeah, I mean, I've got neighbors that I have to deal with, so.
So, Jason, you were talking about you were always with police officers when you were
Yes.
there.
Right. And one of the stories that came out of all of that was two police officers, two Marines standing on a whatever sidewalk, hearing shots fired from the building across the street. Police officers say, cover us, and start to go around the police car that's on the curb. Marines talking guns into the building. Uh, supposedly, something like 90 rounds get fired into this building, supposedly, in the story, before the police get them to stop shooting. And whether or not that was a real story or we'll call it a Marine Corps parabel. I'm sorry. To try and illustrate the importance of cover by fire and cover by observation, and how civilian authorities view that differently than Marines do. It was always a funny story. It made the circles. Everybody told it. Everybody heard it. It's kind of funny. I don't think it. I couldn't imagine it actually happening. I mean, it could have. Totally could have.
So, was your rules of engagement to only fire if fired upon, or
Absolutely. Well, yeah, but there was also
yeah.
no. We weren't supposed to project force, right? So the whole point of it wasn't to project force, at least for us. Now, years ago, 2011, somewhere, no, it was closer to 2014. There was a Reddit conversation I was involved in where we talked about my time in the riots, because a photographer later on in our time there, we went out along, torrents, and we did like sort of presence patrols, small groups, 2 or 4 of us, fire teams maybe at the most, with a police escort, usually by car, and with a radio. And we would just like sort of, ambassadorship more than anything, being seen. And during that time, people would stop and thank us and all this stuff. And I got a LA Times photographer took a picture of me hugging this girl named Kayla from outside of a car, and that made it into the LA Times, and they did a 20-year retrospective or whatever, and that picture came up. My buddy said that was me. Started this huge conversation on Reddit, and in that there were several Marines, I think some Army guys, who talked about uh, more aggressive deployments in the riots, where they were standing shoulder to shoulder, fighting bodies back, under threat of martial violence in both directions, right? So I didn't have any of that. That wasn't my experience. The biggest, the craziest, I think, experience we had was just being right in the middle between what was clearly a bad relationship, whether it was earned or otherwise, I'll let somebody else decide, but a bad relationship between police and citizens. In this case, projects, citizens in the projects, and Long Beach Police Department. There was some sheriff's guys up there too, I think, and CHP. But the level of distrust between those two groups of people was so enormous, and we were stuck right in the middle of it. Everybody was okay with us. That was probably my biggest takeaway from the LA riots, aside from all the larger political issues at the ground level. When we first got to Carmelitos, I'll try to back up. I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but when we first got to Carmelitos, there's 2 entrances into that housing project, and so we shut down one squad went over there and kept that shut down, and then my squad came over by the main entrance, and we just controlled access. And during that time, we found out that the police don't even go in there unless they can roll 4 deep. And the Carmelitos looks nice. There's nothing like from it. It's not like, it's not like a dystopian future in that it's just just housing. And so me and another Marine we'll call Monty went for a walk through. As soon as we got there, we reconned the place, walked all the way through it. And when we got back, the police were like, "What are you doing? Are you crazy? Are you trying to get shot?" And we're like, "No." We had conversations the whole time. Everybody was super nice to us, right? They were glad to have us there, I think. And there was one gentleman who I don't know if he was being supportive or threatening. Either way, we had a brief conversation with him. The rest of the time we were there, I gained 11 pounds. People were bringing us food. We're just standing there in the sun with riot shields and red gear and whatever. The kids wanted to talk to us all the time. We became like 2 weeks worth of daycare, I think, for the projects, because every kid came out to hang out with us, to the point where it was becoming dangerous. So we would, at one point, we designated him as like instructor, and he was taking these kids over to a little field and teaching them how to do push-ups the Marine Corps way. Pretty sure he told them some fibs about the laser guns that we didn't have, but whatever, was keeping kids occupied in a field. And that was the majority of it. We had a couple times where people would drive by and look threatening, and we brought guns up a couple times on folks, but nothing really dangerous happened to us in the LA riots.
That's a good story. I have more of a feel good feeling than perhaps I would have imagined. So thank you to the 36 folks that are joining us. We're going to talk JTF6 next, but so I'm really happy to hear that. I think it's probably good for those that are currently in the military, that will be used as we continue to see riots across America and cities burn. Because we are in a rough time right now. And so let's talk about the LA riots, kind of wind down. You guys, I'm sure, are probably brought back in, and then what's next in your very eventful career?
Well, I want to say one other thing about that kid situation we were dealing with. We were, again, I credit Monty with this idea. He doesn't remember it, but that's a very Monty thing to not remember. We had people delivering us food, right? Constantly. Domino's would pull up in a minivan and give us a stack of pizzas. We had coolers of soda being dropped off. And so at one point, the kids were becoming a problem for us, especially once we realized that someone might test our metal. It never got that far, thankfully, but we had some cars doing slow rolls past us and reaching for things. And we just escort them across the intersection with our muzzles. But once we realized that there could potentially be a problem, Monty's idea was, come back with a full trash bag and we'll give you a slice of pizza and Pepsi or whatever, Coke, for every bag you fill. So for the last 6 or 7 days we were in Carmelitos, the dumpsters were overfilling. These kids were running inside and cleaning houses to fill trash bags. I mean, there was probably valuable stuff going in some of these trash bags, but they were filling them and throwing them at the dumpster. And Carmelitos looked beautiful. Everything looked beautiful. I mean, we didn't even know it wasn't that bad in the first place. So I don't know where they were getting all this stuff, but they kept kids. They would run up, they would show us the bag, throw it away, and come back for their pizza. And so we had a dedicated Marine to the commissary there. But aside from that, we kept kids out of our face, kept the place looking nice. Maybe some lessons were learned, if not by them, by us. It was a really great thing, and that was all Monty, and he doesn't remember a bit of it, which is so. I don't know about you, but did you serve with some guys who you could just tell were just better people? They were just better people than you were.
Oh yeah,
Monty was one of those guys. He's just a better person.
and I served with people that were worse people than me.
Yes, that's true too. But anyway, so we get back from the riots, all a little bit heavier. Long Beach, interesting footnote. Long Beach offered us a standing invitation to become police officers up there, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the time, they were paying $36,000 a year to be a police officer. And that sounded like a lot of money to everybody sitting in that parking structure when they said it. But they had just come off of one, every quarter century, 66, the riots in Watts, 92, the Rodney King riots, whatever's happening now almost 30 years later. We've got a problem. I'm not sure that, I have a lot of respect for people who become police officers for all the right reasons. And I think that's the vast majority of them, right? I do believe that. That right there sold me on not becoming a regular municipal police officer, that whole event. So we get back. We've got this sort of golden ticket list of people who aren't going to have to go to Okinawa. They're going to be going to 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines to set up a new unit, idea, heavy guns at the battalion infantry level, primarily to facilitate thermal night vision as part of a reconnaissance role. And we're filling it with veterans and a couple new guys that hadn't been to Desert Storm, but mostly veterans. And then there's the rest of the guys that are going to have to go to Okinawa. And there's people like trying to wheel and deal their way onto the list. It was crazy. And against the backdrop of 1st Recon Battalion and 1st Light Armor Infantry Battalion merging. So they merge about the same time that we leave. I don't know that I ever actually got the official unit designation, 1st Recon Light Armored or not, because 2 days later I'm in 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, June that year. And we almost immediately start preparing for Kosovo. So that was happening. We went, at the time, Camp Pendleton didn't have its own combat town. So we had to go to Fort Ord, the Army base, in order to use their combat town to start training for Kosovo, if I remember correctly. And maybe I'm getting my order of events here wrong. We may have done JTF 6 first, and I'm having a hard time remembering because it all happened pretty quickly. Let's just assume we did Fort Ord first, and then instead of Kosovo, we get orders to do JTF 6. Now, JTF 6, now called Joint Task Force North, is just a combined military, federal law enforcement agency task force. They do various drug I guess the high-speed, low-drag guys do interdiction stuff. We were doing mostly reconnaissance and terrain denial operations in the Boot Heel of New Mexico for about 6 weeks, I think, 6 or 8 weeks over that fall. And the point of that, Border Patrol and DEA would set up choke points, and then we'd occupy the space in between so that people wouldn't try to come our way, and they'd funnel into these choke points. And so the war on drugs, the war on illegal immigration, 2 wars that you could argue we haven't been winning for a long time. But we made headway. I mean, that was the third time in my career that I had a loaded weapon, and the second time on U.S. soil, all within just a few months of each other. Right? Really speaking. It was let's see if I can remember. I remember 2 things stick out. One was being on a security patrol at night, passive IR, and we see 4 coyotes or something coming across the border, and
drug smugglers are 4-legged coyotes.
Yeah, they're either two-legged, they're either coyotes, 2-legged people coyotes, or they're drug carriers. I'm not sure, but all we weren't allowed to. Our ROE there was the same as it was in the LA riots, where we don't pull the trigger first for a couple of reasons. Back then, our GPS units were like chest size. Do you remember those? They had 2 LED lines on the top of them to read out. Other than that, it was compass and line of sight navigation. There was no telling that we weren't on the Mexican border. Like
Right.
we could have been on the Mexican side of the border. So our goal there was only not to create an international incident, but just to like turn on our moonbeams, let people know we were there, and they would just turn around and go away, right, over and over again. It happened one time that where they surprised us. That's why it's memorable. passive infrared is especially the kind we had, difficult to negotiate depth, right? And things don't look like things until it's almost too late. At least in our experience. So my experience. That, and then the other time I remember being on a mountain with we had to hump our tow weapon system minus the tube because we weren't going to get a missile up to the top of this dang mountain. And sit there in the snow looking over the vast array of the, whatever we could see of the border and try to find heat signatures crossing the border so we could call them in. And then INS or DEA would go pick them up. That's it. Those are my two biggest memories. That and a lot of spades in our tent city that we made. We played a lot of spades.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about that is if you look at those two experiences, the LA riots, and then what you were doing there with Joint Task Force on the border, trying to stop, doing drug interdiction. And here we are almost 30 years later, same problems.
All of it's the same.
It's the same problems 30 years later. And if we don't, I say this to the audience, and I know many of you would probably agree, if we don't do something now, then it's going to be another 25, 30 years. We just keep kicking the can down the road. And I don't, for the life of me, understand why we can't confront these head. We'll make everything a public health crisis. And yet we still repeat the same problems again. It's the definition of insanity.
It is. And the really sad part about this is that, we have people who are eager to try and apply their skills and their life to solving these problems. And without support to actually try and get into the end zone on any of these, people they're just wasting time and lives. It's pretty frustrating.
It is frustrating. And I think part of it probably is the American political dynamic, in as much as, well, all I got to do is stick my finger in the dike for the next 4 years, try to get reelected. And then, we just keep pushing the problem down the road, whether that's, I'm going to print more money because that solves the problem today, but it creates a tsunami down the road. But that's the conversation perhaps for another show. But
that's exactly what it is. And that's exactly what we did, both at the LA riots and in JTF 6. We just put fingers in holes. That's it. We're just and the people who decided that the finger needed to be in the hole are so far disconnected from the experience of that and the risk of that. I mean, in neither case did we lose anyone, but that doesn't mean that border operations are safe. It does not mean that, riot control is safe and that it always ends up with nobody losing their lives. The kind of, I guess, disrespect that is organizationally given to the people who are sticking their fingers in the hole is unconscionable. It's unconscionable. Anyway.
Yeah.
These are people. We should be trying to support them. And again, you can think that borders are a construct of the Middle Ages and no longer apply. Blah blah blah. I don't care what your opinion of that is, but we need to do whatever we need to do to make it less dangerous, right? If we're not going to do anything, if we're not going to kick the ball all the way down the field, we at least need to make it less dangerous for the people who are carrying it.
Well, and those that would feel that these borders are an anachronism, I would encourage you to take the open door challenge. Take a hammer and a screwdriver and pull the pins out of your door and put them up in the attic, and let's see how that works out for you. I mean, we have to have, and human society has always been this way for a vast amount of reasons, that we have to have borders and they have to be guarded. Now, was a Marine infantryman the right people to do it?
As good as any.
I don't know. Yeah, as good as any, yeah. But I would also say that, having been a law enforcement officer and been a young infantryman, the level of training and maturity for one and how to deal with those complex moral decisions were probably a little bit better for the law enforcement officer. But even there, the training is minimal, man. Somebody made a great point the other day. If you look at the training requirements for someone to be a beautician in the state of Tennessee, it's like 3 times or 4 times the amount of hours and training necessary to be a beautician than it is to be a law enforcement officer. And it's like, guys, what are we doing here, man? And we wonder why we keep having problems.
Yeah. Well, and again, you could make the argument that that the problems, it doesn't matter how much training a police officer has. Let's say we triple it or quadruple it, whatever. Quadruple what it is to be a beautician. If you're not going to do anything to support them, meaning kick them out, kick people out on the border. It's as simple as get them back out, right? Whether they be southern neighbors or not. If they don't belong here, kick them out. If you're not going to do that, then it doesn't matter. It could be a Walmart greeter at the border, right? Like that level of training. Go that way. There's bathrooms over here. Da 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 da, and that would be sufficient. So I don't know what the right answer is there, but I do believe that society, like our society, is so successful. I see it all the time. We've become so disconnected from our basic needs, the things that we need to survive, the protection. We take all of that, for granted, and it allows us to be sort of dumb about how we do things, how we live, and that level of success, I think, is probably our biggest enemy right now. We don't have a natural predator that we can recognize. We need to fix that.
Yeah, I want to, before we jump to Somalia, because I'm really interested in hearing about that, because you were on I believe, the initial wave in to Somalia. I would just say a couple of things about Joint Task Force missions. They are currently ongoing. I remember being a recruiter. No, I was running the recruiting substation in Cookeville, Tennessee, and this guy comes in civilian clothes. He's like, "Hey, brother, can I get some Marine Corps stickers?" I'm like, "Yeah, man." And I'm like, and he's telling me, "Hey, I'm Corporal so-and-so." I'm like, "Oh, cool. What are you doing here in Cookeville, Tennessee?" He's like, "I'm on the JTF." I'm like, "What are you doing?" And basically he was a bulk fuel guy. So they would drive these fuel trucks out to a cornfield here in Tennessee. The helos that were circling around looking for pot fields, they would land. He would fill up the helo. It would go back up. And then they would radio, "Hey, meet us at this next cornfield in a couple hours." And he would drive over there. The helo would land, refuel them. And I'm like, wow, I had no idea. He's like, "Oh, yeah, this stuff goes on all the time." So we are, Mike Seeklander, when he did a couple of JTF missions in California, working with the Drug Enforcement Agency as an intelligence analyst. So,
oh yeah, I bet. Yeah.
This stuff is going on all the time, and again, it's like we just keep playing whack-a-mole without really kind of coming up with a comprehensive solution to the problem.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of a loss for words right now, but the issue is not that we can't. Not that there isn't backbone for a solution. I don't care what your opinion on the war on drugs really is, but we have created a situation where that enterprise is very dangerous. And if we're going to support making it a dangerous enterprise, then we need to start talking about solutions and not band-aids. Not like we can't. We do this internationally, politically too. We create dangerous situations. We create enemies who don't have the ability to be an effective enemy yet. But then 20 years from now, they're all learning how to fly planes. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, wow, they have long memories. We don't care. We need to start doing more about the situations that we've created, the dangerous situations we've created, especially, I think. JTF 6, the war on drugs, I don't know how you stay engaged in a war that you don't intend to win, or that doesn't seem organizationally they don't seem to intend to win.
Can we talk about that real quick? Because I think this is a strategic policy problem for our nation, and that is we don't know what victory looks like.
Right.
I'm going to use Afghanistan as a classic example. So we've been there for 20 years, and I don't think we've ever had an example of what does victory look like. Was it the expulsion of the Taliban? Well, we accomplished that in a matter of a week or two.
Right.
but yet we're still there. So what is the end state we're going in? The way I understand it in the what they called McPP, which is the Marine Corps planning process, or even R2P2, which is rapid reaction planning process, we always start with what is the end state and work backwards. What does success look like and work backwards? What, like
Right.
your point to the war on drugs, man, what does success look like? Or are we just going to keep playing this whack-a-mole game for eternity?
I feel like, well, and again, this might be a conversation for another time, but I do feel like most of our policies kind of fly in the face of our enterprising American ideals, in that uh, we I think for someone the war on drugs success looks like some suburban kid not being able to get a hold of heroin. However, we are also, America, where a free person can be able to consume whatever goods or services they can access. And so this idea of sort of, we ran into it with prohibition. Uh, we're going to run into it with any gun ban that happens in the future. Trying to synthetically limit a market never works. Natural limitations are the only way a market changes, right? Natural regulated, self-regulating natural changes. Um, Prohibition, interesting thing. Again, just to go back on that, because I think that's one-to-one on the drug war, right? When prohibition was enacted, drinking went up, spiked for a minute, and then it fell back down to normative levels almost immediately, right? It didn't change. 30% of adults who drank before prohibition, they were drinking again after prohibition. And then when they lifted it, there was a small spike, and then bam, back down to normative levels. Instead of looking at history and saying, you know what, 30% of our adults are going to engage in alcoholic beverage drinking, and being okay with that, building a system that's resilient to that behavior, they tried to build a system that controls that behavior, and they doing it with drugs too. What does I'm not the Ireland guy. They give everybody a universal base income and free needles to everyone who wants them, right? I'm not quite there yet, but I do feel like somewhere in between this draconian policy of imprisoning mostly poor people, and their free society, absolutely free drug society, is there's got to be some happy medium in between the two that the market will naturally find. I don't know, but I
No,
rambled there, but
no,
okay.
it's an interesting. We need to start having these national conversations about it because, your point about the war on drugs, maybe let's say at its rawest form is to keep some 18-year-old kid in a suburb from getting on heroin. But if that is the case, I'd say it's a miserable failure.
I
Uh,
think that I
yeah,
agree.
because yeah, I mean, and we've banned drugs, and yet America has the greatest appetite for drugs in the world. And now they're talking about banning guns, which we'll get to a little bit later in today's show. And what do you think that's going to do? Because banning drugs didn't work. It's
Well,
led to a very brutal war and the narco wars of Mexico, which 60 or 80,000 people have died in just in the last decade or so. So anyway,
prohibition. At the time of prohibition, you could go out and buy a fully automatic rifle, carbine at your will. If you had the money, go in a gun store, buy the BAR. There's that interesting. I don't know. I'm not a big Hollywood guy, but Kevin Costner just did that Highwayman, I think. Did you see that? And there's a scene in that
oh
where he
yeah,
just
yep.
walks into a gun store and buys a Browning automatic rifle. It was great. Um, Criminal trade hadn't been hyper violent until prohibition. We invented the hyper violent gangster by taking away alcohol and creating an opportunity, a void in the marketplace that was violently assumed. And so I think the same things happen with the drug war. Now the violence, nobody seems to care about enterprising young men in our inner cities or in our rural areas engaging in a less than socially acceptable form of enterprise, but still putting in the work, being entrepreneurial to become a new drug dealer, them and all of their friends getting shot up all the time, right? Building meth, becoming a meth cook and starting a network of meth distribution. these are enterprising pursuits. I don't care what you say. That's takes a lot of cojones and it takes a lot of effort, and people are putting in good work for a bad cause. But they're dying. It's hyper violent. It's still hyper violent. They don't make the news unless they bleed over into, you know, some a kid is shot in the city, or you know, something blows up in the rural areas. Otherwise, we just it's a background noise for the dog and pony show that's happening on national news. And so, what about those lives? Those lives matter. They matter, right? I don't know.
Well, I know Guile is on this morning in the Philippines, and I know that his president launched a pretty unorthodox approach to hit their own war on drugs in the Philippines. But you know, you mentioned something a minute ago that I thought was a pretty good segue into Somalia, and that is that you know it. You said something, Jason, like you know we create these enemies because they have this long mind, this longer approach to problems than we do, and let's adjust if we can to Somalia. How did you end up over there?
So that was a redirection, right? Again, we were Bosnia Herzegovina was the big press item at the time, right? There was everybody was worried about that, and then I think we had statesmen over there dodging sniper fire and all kinds of stuff back then. But we it's kind of a joke actually, but the Somalia, I don't remember. Like Somalia jumped on us out of nowhere. We weren't tracking at all as Marines, right? Infantry Marines. We were all worried about going to Europe and Baltics or whatever. And all of a sudden, we find out that we're going to Somalia as part of this UN Operation Restore Hope mission, and that you know we started getting intel about it, and you know warlords. Roving bandits essentially had usurped all the UN food, um, you know, like peaceful UN efforts to bring food to impoverished communities inside Somalia, and you know, so it's essentially the Somali pirates. Only they started on land, and that's what they were doing in 1992. So. Uh, there was a really quick turnaround on that. I remember my mom got a phone call from a friend of hers who was a travel agent, and she's like, "Hey, is Jason going to Somalia?" And I was like, "What?" So she did this all the time. Actually, everywhere I went was preceded by a travel agent called my mom. "Hey, is Jason going to Somalia?" Uh, and so I don't know, OPSEC, whatever. Sure enough, we got on a Sun Coast Airlines 747. Flew towards Somalia. We stopped, I think we sat for a while in Cairo waiting for the LCACs to prepare for their landing in Mogadishu. And as soon
LCAC,
as
can you
they,
explain that, Jason?
oh, yeah,
LCAC.
yeah, LCAC, yeah, sorry. Landing craft air cushioned, right? It's a giant hovercraft. And it sort of replaced the old, you know, it was our amphibious landing tool of choice. We still had Amtraks, obviously, but for large equipment, that doesn't work. It's just people. So LCAC, we could put 4 LAVs on an LCAC. I think one tank. I can't remember all the different weight limitations that were on them, but they would come in off the back of, you know, I guess an LHA, or which is a ship, um, or whatever. I don't know what the ships they held LCACs on, and they would hit the beach, and then all you have to do is break the tie downs and drive right off the darn thing. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool thing. Pretty smooth ride too, actually, comparatively. Um, so the beach, the actual landing was done. I guess there were SEALs and maybe some Force Recon guys who came in by Zodiac boat before, and then the main invasion force came in on LCACs. We were circling in the air in a 747, and as part of 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, um, striking 39 RIP. I don't have colors right now. And as soon as they secured Mogadishu, the airport is right on the beach. It's like you can see the water from the airport. So um, as soon as they secured the airport, boom, down came the 747, and we all unloaded. And immediately got in a formation and sat for a while. You know, jump off the plane, run under some cover, and sit on your backpacks. That was Mogadishu, and from there, our job was to secure a portion of Mogadishu for to set up an HQ, regular patrol to try and prevent any incursions by these sort of roving bands of warlords that existed in Somalia at large.
Can we pause right there?
Yeah.
So most people, Jason, are going to be familiar with Somalia from the movie Black Hawk Down.
Yeah.
And I would also invite you to, for those that want to defund the police, that's what you get when you defund the police. When the
Oh,
police
wow.
pull out and there is no one there, you get roving bands of warlords, man. Order will always, or chaos will always fill that vacuum when order pulls out. So if that looks like a good time for you, the movie Black Hawk Down, Somalia, then keep pushing that narrative of defund the police. What say you, sir?
Absolutely. I mean, and so I guess my history is a little bit spotty on Somalia, but at the time, I believe the Italians built Mogadishu essentially into what there was going to be sort of like a French Riviera part 2 for them, right? Like a vacation destination. And I don't know how bad that went, but by the time we got there, decades later, right? This is in the 60s, I think they were trying to develop it. By the time we got there, there had been a brutal civil war. You couldn't see a building that wasn't fired down, like not fire as in, burning fire, but projectile impacts on every building you could see, everywhere. There had been gunfire, big guns too, throughout Mogadishu, and it was very much like, I'm not super well traveled, but a lot of my preconceived notions about the world came from movies and whatever, and it reminded me very much of sort of that kind of typical bazaar you would have seen in like a Indiana Jones movie, where the entire place, you're like, there's just no, anybody just does anything anywhere kind of thing, right? And it was exactly like Mogadishu was exactly like that. I have a bunch of pictures. I'll share them with you. But for a while we were overwatching a part of the city from one of the taller buildings, like a 4-story building. I think it was that fruit warehouse, right? And you could see first of all, the city wasn't particularly well planned. There was not very grid-like, right? So there's streets going in all kinds of crazy directions. But people were walking camels through town and all kinds of just absolute, it was shenanigans 24/7. And for that reason, there is no way, if anyone had wished us ill, and eventually they did. Before we left, we didn't get out of there without being shot at on a couple occasions. And I'm talking about Mogadishu proper. You couldn't tell anybody from anybody else. There's no way you're going to tell anybody from anybody else. We found later on, while we were doing, we moved from Mogadishu to Baidoa, which is about 6 hours inland in Somalia. And Somalia, again, for those who maybe aren't familiar, is like, if you look at Africa as a skull, it's the nose right at the bottom of the canal, or the whatever. So it is shaped like this, and maybe like that. And so Mogadishu is down here, and then Baidoa is further up here. And inland. So we went to Baidoa, and part of our operation there was protecting UN ships, UN convoys that were bringing food and grain to townships. And at that point, we were confiscating weapons from everyone. I mean, like literally, you'd find people that looked like, they didn't look threatening at all. They were super nice, but they had caches of weapons in their truck, or everything was absolutely insane. You couldn't tell a warlord from the only time you could tell somebody who was bad from good is if they were very successful at being bad, because they were generally cleaner and better dressed. They had to be very successful, though, right? That was it. Somalia was a mess. Yeah, it was a miserable place. Uh, and I can't imagine. But by the time, it wasn't uncommon to see bodies that were dead or that you couldn't determine, that you wouldn't approach close enough to determine if they weren't dead. Just in these little towns, people didn't have enough nutrition to fight off basic infections. If somebody were wounded, this is a funny story, funny in a non-ha-ha kind of way. They weren't afraid of you pointing a gun at them when we were guarding food, right? So I'll back up. Once we got to Mogadishu, a little after Christmas, we had been patrolling our area of Mogadishu. We had denoted with the green line. And one day I was driving around and just getting shot at every time we come up to this one little corner. And the first time it happened, it was two vehicles. We had a 50 cal and a Mark 19 Hummer and full loadout, 4 Marines each. We get out, one guy on the radio, and we start bounding up the street towards this. It was a guy in a taller building, clearly taking pot shots at us. Not dangerously close, but you can still hear him. And we got called back. We were probably, I don't know, halfway to him, bounding down the street when we got called back. Not to pass the green line, but also not to stop patrolling and not to change our route. So for the rest of the day, we drove, Christmas Day, 1992, we drove around the circle and got shot at as soon as we came up that corner. Ping, 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 all day long.
It's classic, man. That's classic.
Yeah, right. Merry Christmas. So we were very happy to leave Mogadishu. We went to Baidoa. We started guarding UN food trucks. When we realized that we weren't running into any static, it turns out that most of the UN guys had been paid. They were locals anyway, had been paid by warlords, so they just weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing while we were with them. So we'd hang back and let them do their own, food delivery, and they'd immediately go towards the wrong place, and then we'd sweep in. Technicals of Hiluxes with pintle-mounted machine guns would scatter, and we'd take them back to where they were supposed to go. It was another big batch of futility. But when we'd finally deliver the food, these people were so hungry. One of the UN workers told us, you can't let them get this food because we're sending people in here to prepare it. If they eat it unprepared, it's going to cost them more calories to try and digest it than they'll receive from it, and it'll just worsen their condition. So we throw all of this food into this, bags of grain and whatnot, into like a little hut, and then we'd stand guard around it, and they would be pushing like on us. They're all hungry. I mean, can you imagine? And so, I mean, there was a time when we had M16s on people's foreheads, and all they're trying to do is get around it. Ron ended up getting frustrated because he knew he wasn't going to pull a trigger on one of these guys. Pulled his gun back and punches a guy in the chest. There was like a big group of them, fell down like dominoes, and then they gave us space. They were more worried about being hurt than I think they were worried about being shot. Because shot's a final answer, but hurt, you carry that forever in Somalia. You're just hurt from now on. It was horrible. Kids with open wounds that would never heal. We had corpsmen trying to solve some of those problems when they came across them, but that whole population was in horrible shape. Ran into some people who speak English, so I'll send you some tapes I got of those interviews. Those are pretty interesting too.
Yeah. I think you mentioned a moment ago that you're not very well traveled. Well, relative to the average American, you're incredibly well traveled. But the only problem is you've only been to war zones predominantly.
Yeah.
and of course, that I talked to a lot of Marines, like you, Jason, having gone to war zones, and I'm like, hey, man, go somewhere beautiful for a change. There's a beautiful world out there that flies aren't crawling across the eyeballs of babies and stuff like that, But I think the average American, to hear these stories, it probably does them good because we can go there too. I think there's something that people think, well, it'll never, ever happen here. Folks, it can absolutely happen here. If it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. It's just a few bad decisions that get amplified and get spin out of control. And then you can have a situation like that.
There's places in America, if you take a wrong turn,
Yeah.
In America, you can land in places that aren't very different from Somalia. You can
Yeah.
land in places that, I mean, in rural America, in urban America, there are places where you can go where it is indiscernible, like it's hard to understand. A lot of my friends are police officers. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to criminology, criminal justice school, and made a lot of friends. Went on to law enforcement careers, and the stories they tell. Having a conversation with a guy who's holding his skull on his head because of, he's been shot. He's gonna die. The EMS isn't gonna get there fast enough for this guy. But he's trying, having that conversation. Like, can you imagine that? Can the average American imagine waking up one day and going to see that kind of thing? No, they couldn't. It happens every day. It happens every day here. Ah,
Oh yeah,
horrible stuff.
I could tell you stories, and I know many people that are on this morning are current and former law enforcement, and they can
Yeah.
tell the same things of being in a trailer park. So my point, I guess, is race has nothing to do with it. I've been
No.
in trailer parks where it's all poor white people, and you have a lot of problems in there, and then being in the projects where they're predominantly African American, and the similar problems, and their drug problems, poverty problems, lack of education problems, but they lead to these, violence and all these other social ills. And again, to something you and I said earlier, we really need to stop playing kick the can and try to solve some of these problems. Or we're going
It,
to leave what kind of future we're
yeah.
going to leave for our kids, man.
I don't know. Well, honestly, I don't know that they are going to have the tool. Like, we're distancing. So let me back up. A lot of things go through my head, but it's disengagement, right? Disengagement that leaves subcultures to fester. Sometimes I had a sociology professor once who told me that if you took 12 Franciscan monks, the most pious monks of the whole, that ever existed, you stick them in a room for 100 years, right? By the end of that 100 years, one of those, even though they're all identical, they're all the same amount of pious, one of those person will emerge as the example of what to be like. And one will emerge, at least one, will emerge as the example of what not to be like, because society does that. It's just what we do. We create deviance out of a vacuum, and then we attribute positive or negative, connotations to that deviance. And so there's always going to be deviance. Albert Einstein, an example of positive deviance. Al Capone, example of negative deviance. We will always going to have these guys. They might not always be Al's, but what they will be, though, is something that we can't let go. We have to keep them. We have to pull them back into society and make sure that they don't go feral on the bad end, or they don't go megalomaniac on the high end, right? Like, we've got to keep them engaged. And I don't. That sounds like super easy, like it's a super simple. I'll have my latte and say we need to get engaged, but in some areas it's gotten so bad. I don't know how you do that now. I don't know how we bridge that gap between subcultures, the larger one that we call America still today, and the smaller one that everybody makes fun of us for being also America.
Yeah, and like JD Helly, retired FBI agent, when I had him on, I think it was last Friday, we talked about, there needs to be certain things where 3 violent felony convictions, man, you have broken your pact with society. You've shown through your history that, and I'm talking about convictions, violent felonies, not a guy who stole his neighbor's expensive lawnmower or something. I'm talking about he's out there hurting other weaker members of society. You've broken your pact, and I'm not going to pull you in anymore. I'm just going to protect society from you because you're just a predator.
Yes, wholeheartedly yes. And yeah. So I start to see things. I've started to see, and maybe it's just old white guyitis. I don't know, but I've started to see certain government programs as a form of neglect, right? So, uh, you know, we have big hearts. We want to help everybody. So, somebody in the government convinces us we should use their program to help those people, and of course we're going to vote. Yes, it's a great idea. Help those people. Fine. It takes me off the hook for making a difference, right? And allows me to pay a government to do an ineffective job of maybe what was a great idea. that system becomes abuse. No one goes in and engages that system. It becomes abusive to both the payer and the payee. And next thing you know, it is now an organizational form of neglect, and probably closer in many cases in urban society to the most institutionally racist efforts the government still has, far more so than policing. So, it's a big, complex problem. And until we get systemic thinkers who want to serve people in positions of power in this country, servant leadership with long-term thinking, I don't know that we have a chance at surviving the results of bad short-term policy. I just don't think we do.
Ah, well said. And I remember being a law enforcement officer, and I was sitting in service one morning, and they're like, we've got, let's say Sarah coming in from I'm going to make up an agency, the Victims Right Advocate for blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. She gives us all a pamphlet, and I'm like, this is incredible. It says that when a violent felon goes to prison and he's stamping out license plates, a portion of what he makes goes back to some sort of big pool of money, and it's sitting in a bank earning interest, I imagine.
Right.
And what she said is, I want to help you get access to your victims of street crime, access to this money. And I'm like, this is incredible. Because she's like, a lot of times they get hurt, they get injured, and there's who's going to pay those medical bills? The dirtbag that hurt them? Well, from this pool of money, they can get recover some lost wages, recover medical expenses, recover maybe a little bit of punitive damages. So I thought, this is incredible. How come I've never heard of this? And she says, yeah, it's really simple. Here's all they got to do in order to get this money. They got to file the police report within 24 hours of the crime. They got to go to every court appearance. They got to do this. I mean, and this list became, it was an insurmountable. And she started the conversation with, we have tens of millions of dollars. We just can't give it away. And I'm like, well, I see why. You've got so much damn bureaucracy built into this thing. It's almost impossible for someone to get it. And again, it's like, well, sometimes, like you said, I want to just give my tax dollar and forget about it and let the government handle it. But the problem is, government isn't always the right answer. Sometimes they just create problems, right?
Honestly, I don't think, I had this conversation with a good friend of mine who said that the only real purpose of government is conflict resolution, right? This is the only thing we really need them for. Conflict between parties, conflict between external entities, whatever. Government's just supposed to be a mediator between these conflicts. Now, in some cases, that conflict is, I don't have any, I need to eat, or I need healthcare, or da 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 da. They start to get involved in some of these more complex conflicts, and humans, I see this all the time. Progress, right? That's what we do. We make progress, for better or for worse. We go forward. And what oftentimes we forget to do is go back to the beginning and ask if we started down the right road to solve this problem in the beginning. We just start pasting new solutions at the back end where everything's already bad and it's not getting better, instead of saying, hey, you know what? If we take a left turn at Albuquerque back here, everything goes a different way. But I don't know. I think, my dad always told me, help people who are willing to help themselves. Like this, if you have to pick people to help the ones that are completely helpless, that don't have the ability to help themselves, or help the ones that are trying to help themselves. That's it. Could you imagine needing funds and then having to jump through those, but you've been victimized. Maybe, your house has been arsoned, or worst case scenario, your earner in your household's been killed by somebody, and now you have to go show up at all these court appearances. You don't have a car, you don't have money to buy a car, you don't even have, how do you do any of this stuff? You might make it halfway down the list, and you've done more than I would have done, right? I don't know. That's a whole different thing. The same problem happens. People, a funny thing that happens when you tell people you're in the military, they assume this like level of elite, awesome training and support that you had. And what they don't realize is that you're like a gun-toting government employee. Like the difference between you and the DMV person is that you had to ride a ship occasionally and carry a gun. But aside from that, I mean, it's kind of the same deal. And uniforms look better, yes, but and there's a physical fitness component. Aside from the minor details, you're still a government employee. You still run around, you do dumb things, and you wait for people to make bad decisions, and then you fill the hole or whatever. And Somalia was a prime example of that. So we could have done real good in Somalia real quick, but we would have had to turn off all the cameras, make some loud noises, and that ship, I'm afraid, has sailed. And I know there's humanitarians out there who think that I'm being callous about it, but when you see kids starving to death, and you know that there's just a bad guy who, if he was just if he had just a few more holes than what he was born with, that kid would eat food. It becomes a lot easier. We were in Baido. We were patrolling around Baido one time, and we set up a roadblock because we were the guys. I was a corporal at the time, so squad leader. I'm manning a roadblock, and guys in my squad, and I think another squad, are like going through buildings, checking for guns, checking for trouble. And the Somalis they pile 100 people onto these trucks, right? So imagine like a farm truck with hay, or like you see them in the city all the time, these guys collecting pallets on this little tiny old truck, and it's like giant pallets. That's what they did, but it was people, and like literally hundreds of people. It seems like a plane's worth of people on a truck, just hanging on the side, sitting on the hood, all kinds of crazy stuff. Guy pulls up. He's like, we're trying to get through to Baidoa. And I'm like, yeah, it's closed. Road's closed, right? Sorry. And he spoke English, and he broken English, but English. Negotiating with me, trying to get me to let him pass. And I'm like, it's just not gonna happen. But so he comes back with these two beautiful Somali women, young women, completely shaved, no hair on them whatsoever, in these silk dresses. He's like, here, let me pass. I'm like, no, thank you, sir. Yeah, I appreciate your offer, but he's like, no, you can have them. I'm like, I get that. I don't have the time right now. He's like, no, keep them. He was going to give me like permanently. I was going to come home. I don't in my sea bag, I guess. I don't know, with two additional women that I didn't go there with. Right. And they were like, obviously, Somali culture is weird, right? They were obviously bred for this intended purpose, right? And a whole other problem, right? But yeah, Somalia was a crazy place. Anyway, needless to say, he didn't get through till we were done with the patrol. But that's the kind of that was my first experience, I guess, with an individual having a normal conversation with an individual who just didn't value human life the same way I did. Like from a society that also didn't value human life the same way my society did, right? So I guess the lesson I'm trying to say from that is that I came away from Somalia with a complete and utter understanding that I can't apply my worldview to other people's motivations. Like I can't, there are people that I have nothing in common with, and that's okay. It's just that we're going to come in conflict sometimes. And so when you start talking about some of the hesitance we have to solve some of these bigger problems because of humanitarian concerns, I'm going to call it humanitarian concerns, but because of the rights of these violent predators, or maybe we can rehabilitate some of these people who just don't think the way we think. Their brains just don't do it. I came to the conclusion at that point, you just can't. I was never going to change that guy's mind that he couldn't just give me two people. Like that was never going to happen, right? He was going to eat and watch a kid starve on the floor. He didn't care. Like he was just that guy. And we're so far away from that. There's no way that I think we'll ever understand that mindset.
No, we won't. And I want to switch gears a little bit, Jason. We've been on here for almost an hour and a half. I want to be very respectful. I know you got a life. We got mass shootings going on, and I know that the Biden administration is probably under a lot of pressure to do something about it because that was part of his platform all along. And now we've seen, instead of a decrease in the level of violence with the mass killings, we've seen an increase. And I would just ask you, man, is gun control the answer?
So, it's funny because in Somalia we did that. We were gun control in Somalia. Every gun we saw, our gun control was we want to be in control of every gun we saw, and and so we did that. And I mean, I don't have a studied response. Like I didn't get to stay in Somalia and measure the effects of that, but I know that it got worse before it got better. And I know that we took guns away from people who weren't engaged in typical gang or warlord activity over there, but were using them in self-defense. I know we did that, right? Everybody had AKs over there. It was a kind of amazing thing. But anyway, or FALs. Do I think I have? I honestly appreciate the people who believe, like they just believe that if we take guns out of the equation gets happier for everybody. I know there's people who believe that, and I'm empathetic to them. I appreciate them because they care, and maybe sometimes in this conversation, the caring part becomes like a footnote, right? And so I have people in my family like that, and I appreciate their perspective. However, I've seen the other side of it, and if you really care about something, right? If you really care about something, then you should protect it. Uh, you can't unring the bell. We're talking. I just saw in the news, and I don't really watch the news, but I just saw in the news. The threat of nuclear entanglement has increased now. They've raised the threat level on nuclear engagement. That was I was born in the 70s, so I came around at sort of the after effect. My grandparents were worried about bomb shelters and such, right? And civil defense and all that jazz. But it was before me. So, but I do remember it, and I grew up in the Cold War, the end of it, where they thought they had kind of unrung the nuclear bell, and certainly since the fall of the Soviet Union. Emergence of Russia, it seemed like we beat the nuclear threat. If it's coming back, what we should learn from that is that you can't unring that bell. It's just not ringing now. As soon as it's introduced, you can't take it back. We've not been able to do that with any human technology. You can't pull it back. Guns are that way too. So instead of trying to control or unring that bell, I think trying to become resilient to it is the only answer. And that means hardening targets that you care about. And furthermore, trying to find there's something that's changed. I remember in high school, there were guys with shotguns in their truck, right? High school parking lot when I was there. I mean, that was, it was 30 years ago, but that's not, the beginning of the Republic or anything. So, something has changed in our society that we need to be looking into to find out why people just don't care enough about each other, why people are choosing violence, senseless violence, as an answer for a question that nobody but them were asking, right? What is that? What is that thing? Until we do that, then you're going to end up with, I think the first school bombing was like in the 20s or something like that. You're going to end up with those. You're going to end up with arson. You're going to end up with all manner of other kinds of violent expressions from people who just want to express themselves violently.
Yeah, the idea is, I think it's part of it is the language. We say gun violence. I don't believe in that. It's just violence. I mean, when someone rents a truck in New York City or in France or in London and plows through a crowd of people, we don't call it rented truck violence.
No.
Yet it happens all the time. And I hate to say it happens all the time. It does. Or you mix some ammonium nitrate fertilizer and some oil and fuel and you blow up a federal building. We don't call that fertilizer violence. I mean, it's just violence. And there are, like you said, it's a terribly complex problem, but we don't ban fertilizer. I'm on a farm. We need fertilizer, right?
Right.
I have to have it. I have to have a firearm too to deal with the coyotes and stuff like that out here. So the idea that we just need to get rid of this technology, you can't. The genie's out of the bottle with 3D printers and all
Oh
this other
yeah,
technology, man,
yeah,
we can't stop it. Uh, so the idea that all you're going to do is ban the good guys because they're going to turn it in, they're going to do the right things, whereas criminals don't. I'm not a drug user. You're probably not a drug
yeah.
user,
No,
but there are people
Motrin,
out there. What's
Motrin.
that?
I'm a little
Motrin.
addicted to Motrin. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No.
I feel you, man. I've had 3 knee surgeries. I get it, but Matt Sims says, well said, Rich. Firearms are simply tools. They are absolutely tools. Tiny says the answer to mass shootings is shoot back. My good friend Ruben says, I do care enough to enable students to have a fighting chance when bad people break the law and try to do them harm. And I think that is an excellent way that many of our viewers today can educate people. And looks like we have lost Jason, so I'll give him just a second to come back on. But we're talking about what can the average American do to protect themselves, and Mark has a great point. It says we cannot legislate violence. We can't. We cannot. And it's the same thing as we can't legislate morality either when it comes to banning drugs and all these other types of things. Firearms are just a tool. Matt's point is well made. It's morally ambiguous. And looks like Jason is coming back on.
I'm
Welcome
so sorry.
back.
I have no idea what happened. I don't know if I kicked the internet or something, but you were saying that we're kind of preaching to the choir here with this group,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
um, so how do we? Okay, and I was on the tip of asking you a question about that because you were in law enforcement, so you had to deal with people who had come to their worst day, right? On occasion, civilians, Americans, our fellow citizens, and what is it? So, not to suggest, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. What is it? Do you have any insight into that moment where, when I was in the 80s going to school, it was suicide was the concern, right? Kids being bullied to a point or whatever, whatever trigger got them to the point of self-harm. It was always self-harm. No one was talking about, I'm going to make the world burn with me, right? That conversation until Columbine happened much later, that wasn't really in the lexicon for how a problem child was dealing with things. Not really. How do you have any insight into what has changed in society that people now want to make sure that they're not the only ones who are suffering when they're suffering? I mean, is it are we just not teaching the value of human life like we used to? Is it fundamentally changed what we're teaching our children? Where's that not coming from?
Yeah, I don't have an answer, and I think that anybody that prefers a very simple answer to that question really doesn't understand the complexity of it. If you're looking for causation, there's not going to be one single thing. It's going to be the breakdown of the nuclear family. Although I think was it Eric Harris and Dylan Klebo, the two Columbine killers? I think they came
Yeah,
from
yeah.
pretty stable middle class or upper middle
Well,
class
too, yeah.
families. Yeah. Can we say it's violent video games that was part of it? I don't know. SSRIs, I think some of them were on psychiatric medications. I think that it is a big problem to grapple with as to why. Part of it is the 24/7 media machine that glorifies these types of killers, and we don't know the names. I mean, look at that. I just uttered the names of these two murderers. I don't
Yeah,
know the
yeah.
names of any of the children that lost their lives that day.
No.
Yet, I mean, it's so it is a really difficult problem. And another thing is, the first domestic violence call I ever went on as a police officer was, and it came out, it wasn't in my sector, and I was a brand new guy. And they're like, "Hey, I want 152 is my badge number. It's like I want 152 to go to this 1083 or whatever." And I get there, and what it was is an inbred family. I'm not going to say their names, but mother and father were brother and sister. They had a series of children on the outskirts of town. that were all severely mentally handicapped. And there was a fight because the brother and the sister, not the parents that were brother and sister, but the brother and sister, these mentally challenged siblings, were having a sexual affair. The daughter walks in and finds that the brother's having sex with his own mother, and she gets in a fight with mom, and it's just like, how do you stop that? How do you stop that? I mean, now those people are continuing this line of that are always going to be a problem. I guarantee you right now, if I could put money on it, there's probably going to be a call at that house today or this weekend. So what do we do, man? I do not have an answer because it is so difficult. If you start going down the road of some early 20th century eugenics, if you're not careful, like, do we sterilize these
Yeah.
people? Because if not, they're going to continue to breed and we're going to continue to have problems. I mean, I'm not encouraging that. I'm not saying that's an answer. I'm just saying when we search for solutions,
Yeah.
they're so darn hard, man.
Yeah. And the breadth of the problems, that's an absolutely horrible example of some of the problems. Those people are probably less likely. So that's almost outside of society, right? Were they engaged in you know, what about the ones that are inside? The ones that, not just the fringe cases. And there's a lot of, I say fringe in that sort of as a connotation of few. And I don't mean that because I think it's bigger than, it's a lot bigger than we think it is. I mean, I think that story that you have with that household, there's a lot of those households in America, and there's ones that are just nearly the same. The kind of feral, if I keep using that word, but I can't think of a better word for someone who's been outside of the influence of social norms for so long that they've developed their own norms that are alien, I think, to the larger society. There's a lot of people in that case, but those I don't think are the ones that are necessarily shooting up schools or churches or maybe I'm wrong about that. I could totally be wrong, by the way. But I feel like they're engaged in their own sort of criminality that is fully disengaged or largely disengaged from society. The ones that make the news are the ones that appear out of appear out of nowhere. The Klebold's and Harrisons or whatever that came from, what we'd expect to be traditional normative culture and then blew up and took people with them or tried to. And take the example, was it Parkland guy? I'm not gonna say his name, but he had been problematic for some time, and people knew his name, and there had been calls out to his place. There had been concerns expressed. Now, I'm not a proponent of red flag laws by any stretch of the imagination. They are a tool ripe for abuse. But at the same time, if everybody in the community is saying, "Dude, pay attention to this guy. You should be watching this dude. He's having a hard time." The fear of an overly punitive response, I think, has prevented people from engaging assistance at a time when that assistance could make a difference. I could be wrong about that. It's probably not universal. There's probably no universal truths about this, but so, okay, here's an example. If you see somebody who's not really paying attention to the coffee they're carrying and they might spill it, do you call the janitor? Not yet. It hasn't spilled, right? Like there's nothing to clean up yet, but it looks like it's gonna happen, right? So why is everybody assuming that spill is going to happen and it can't be stopped and they're going to call the janitor first instead of walking up to that person and being like, "Look, man, I see you're having some trouble carrying this coffee. Can I help you with that?" Right? Nobody does that anymore, or very few people do that anymore. And I can't help but think that, kids, well, I'm not a super experienced parent. I've made one through teenage years, and I couldn't tell you how many times I couldn't identify all their calls for help, even with that one. But I do feel like kids make those, and if they go unanswered, they can go badder. Like the next one could be worse, and the next one could be even worse. And then eventually they realize that they're on their own, and that can be a very depressing place for a kid to be, I think. How do we fix that?
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of people will say that we have a mental health crisis masquerading as a gun crisis, and maybe that is probably the if you look at one common denominator across the spectrum, it may be that.
Certainly, but if everybody in America had to get a mental health screening, who walks away from that clean? Right? Like, I mean, there's so many. What? Who?
Not me, probably.
What's healthy? I don't know what. There's like healthy, unhealthy, but dangerous is the thing, right? Like willing, ah, it's okay. Everybody wants to be dangerous, right? We want to be dangerous. It's our job to be dangerous. In some cases, people in the American Warrior Society, you have to be able to access that danger when faced with other danger, opposing danger, right? That dangerousness. But there's a difference, right? There's that. How do you, without just saying some people are just better than other people? How do you teach that? How do you teach that responsibility of being dangerous and choosing peace? How do you teach that to somebody? I don't.
I don't know.
Was it a priest that taught me that growing up? Was it my dad? I couldn't put a finger. My mom? Was it just caring? Was it caring? I mean, I don't understand. I don't understand it, and I don't have faith that our mental health science understands it either. I just don't, and I don't want to legislate that sort of thing either. I think we're coming with the vaccine passport propositions. I think we're coming dangerously close to this sort of intersection of health and state that is unsafe for all of us. But yeah, I'm a libertarian that way. So I certainly don't want every American to have a mental health screening just to access basic rights of self-defense or to vote or anything else. Although I'll say it a million times, a vote is far more dangerous than a gun every single day of the week.
Yeah, PJ Tahoe is a retired federal law enforcement officer. He says between 60 and 70% of the school shootings, at least one other person knew there was a person seriously planning to harm and kill others. Lots of warning signs are not dealt with. And that's true. We have to take, I remember when I was on a gang task force briefly before I left law enforcement. And to get on our list, we had a scale. So let's say you get 10 points, you're on the list, right? So if you are associating with known gang members, you might get 2 points. If you're carrying gang colors, 2 points. So now you got 4 points. You're hanging out with known gang members, you're wearing gang colors, we're at 4 points. Let's say I see you flashing gang signs, there's another 2 points. The only way you could get to 10, the only way you could automatically get 10 points is if you said, I am a member of the Gangster Disciples or whatever. That's it. If you say it, I don't give a crap. If you ever fly the color, I don't care if you throw a gang sign, you are on our list. I say that because once someone is uttering that I'm going to harm people at the school, I'm sketching out where the exits are. I've got my chains and locks to lock doors to lock people in the room so I can kill more of them. That's it, man. You're on the list. It's not a red flag law. You threw up your own red flag. Nobody had to go looking for it. But once we know it, man, we got to take these people at their word.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Not only do we have innocent, if you do intervene with somebody who's expressed intent, even if it might be ambiguous, right? So that's the thing, right? That ambiguous intent expressed through online trolling, rage, or whatever. If someone's expressed an intent and you can intervene there, not only are you potentially saving X number of innocent lives, but you're saving his or hers too, right? That's the part that we don't. You can actually be saving. Somebody saying, "I want to hurt someone." You have the opportunity to save their life at that moment, and that's a responsibility that I think people aren't taking seriously. Like, uh, it's in retrospect, knowing what they've done after the fact, going back and trying to be empathetic to a person expressing that sort of "I'm going to hurt people" rage, it feels disingenuous even from that. I have a hard time feeling for these people. But if somebody expressed "I want to hurt people," I can still, if they haven't done it yet, I still have empathy for them, and there's still a chance you can save that person, not only from their own bad decision making, but from potentially death. Right? I mean, most of those mass shooters don't walk out of this alive. I mean, there's some exceptions. The Aurora guy, the Parkland guy. Most of these people, their
They're on
story
a
ends there
one-way
too.
they're on a one-way trip, and they know it. Which let's go back. This is probably the final question I would have for you, or maybe one of the two final questions. One of them is, Jason, knowing what's going on today, what can the average person do to make themselves harder to kill?
Oh, I mean, so I'm dealing with this myself. So I shoot competitively, right? And I'm a competent shooter, but that's kind of where my skills largely. I mean, I'm a thinker too. First of all, you got to be a thinker. Thinker first. Da 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 da. Be critical. Uh, don't don't trust what your eyes are telling you. Engage as many senses as possible. Um, and it's okay to be afraid. Like I had to learn that. That was when I was young. It was not okay to be afraid. But now, as I'm getting older, I'm realizing it's okay. Being afraid of something or hesitant, whatever word you want to use, good indicator. I should listen to that now. But think first. As a competent shooter, I'm a hammer and everything looks like a nail, and I'm realizing that everything's not a nail. So you guys finally pressured me into getting shape and pursuing, in this case, some form of martial art. So you can't win every fight, right? You can't run away from every fight, but you should be prepared to do either. And right now, so to be harder to kill, I'm not a prepper. I feel like there's going to be enough chaos if the whole world falls apart that you can pick and choose what you need. I may be wrong about that, but there's a certain amount of preparations you can do. Physical fitness, read every day. You're a far more accomplished reader than I am, but if you can read something, even if it's just an online article, or maybe listen to a thought-provoking podcast, do something to keep your brain engaged every day so it still thinks. And then for me, find a pursuit that you're passionate about. Right now it's shooting, outside of family, right? It's shooting. And so that gives me the kind of focus. So for some people it's a career, for some people, it can be any number of things, but for me it's competition shooting. And it gives me that, the ability to focus on a thing, to exercise that particular muscle. And I, you know, it, it's in a lot of ways, competition shooting has kind of um, saved my good humor. I think life can be hard if you don't find something you love. It just gets harder, right? Um, so yeah, I think that answers that question.
Yeah. Chris says situational awareness. Yeah, I agree with that. Like you said, Jason, you're a thinker, and you have to be. One of the greatest things we have is our brain that has the ability to project the current situation into the future. I mean, I guess maybe at its most basic level, that's what situational awareness is. I'm aware of what's going on around me, and I can project what's going on around me into some potential future outcomes. And if the potential future outcome is not good, I need to do something, right? I need to take some sort of action.
Yeah,
And then eventually, with enough of those sort of events, I can create this decision matrix so that I don't ever, oh, you know what? Every single time I go to that part of town, something bad happens. I hear a gunfire or I'm approached in my car. I won't go to that, part of town anymore. So you have to, I think it begins, like you said, with your mind, and then we move outside into the body. Is the body in shape? Am I mentally resilient? And if not, how do I build that resiliency? And then, eventually, we get into the hard skills where, as your trophies will attest, you're incredibly proficient with firearms. And let's see, Mark says, panic enters the empty mind. Get training both mind and body. Spot on, Mark.
yeah, yeah. and I would even say, I think there's a part of that we don't talk about, and sometimes we do, and you might lump it in with spirituality or something of that nature. But really, I think it's important. So just like you won't walk into an alley because you know that could be problematic. If you're getting information thrown at you that makes you feel bad, turn that stuff off too. Like positivity, remaining not. I don't mean ignorant, blissfully ignorant. I mean cultivating an optimism about the future is the uh, if you have gotten into shooting at a serious level or trying to, you've engaged, probably you've read Lanny Basham's With Winning in Mind book, right? And you may have engaged in his like mental management process or whatever. But one of the tenets in there is visualization. See the world that you want to be in, right? See it. You got to be able to see it. And so I find myself consumed. Like one of the reasons I don't listen to the news anymore is there's nothing good there. I try to avoid the hype machine until it's time for things to happen. Because it influences my positivity. And if I get negative, I start making, you may not even notice it, but you start making bad decisions sometimes. Not bad, but maybe decisions you wouldn't make if you were happy. Like you might eat food that you shouldn't eat, or you might drink too much, or whatever you might do while you're feeling down. Policing your own well-being is very important, I think, for survivability, making yourself hard to kill. And it's difficult. It's probably the hardest thing I have. That's hard for me. So
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the spiritual dimension, because I almost said that when I was talking about, when we start with our mind and work outward, really we do have to nourish the spirit. And I do that by, my wife and my youngest daughter, we go to church every Sunday, and it's a great way to start the week, because in the American Warrior Society, I have to surround myself with the negativity in order to come up with solutions to help our members make themselves more harder to kill. So I'm constantly watching some of the worst of humanity. And again, with my background in working in corrections, working as a Marine and cop and blah, 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 I've seen, like you have, Jason, some of the worst in humanity. So it's a great place to go and get my spirit nourished, to go back out into the world and put a smile on my face and like Tiny says, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. That's a great way to look at it, man.
But imagine the best too. Like that's what I guess I'm trying to say. An important component of that is, and you have to hope for it, right? If you're really hoping for the best, you have to know what the best looks like, and keeping that in mind is important. And one of the things that I love, the initial, I mean, just to come back as a shameless promo for you guys, the initial appeal of the American Warrior Society is in the world of online interactions about these topics, whether it be specific to policing or self-defense or just world politics, whatever. The amount of respect that people treat each other with in our world, in the American War Society, in those internal conversations, is a breath of fresh air. And it's the kind of thing that we used to, I remember my dad having conversations with his friends, right? Like, or people at work. It was peaceful. It was, even if you disagreed, it was peaceful. Finding places to have important conversations that aren't also stress inducing is really important. And so in this world, I think American Warrior Society does a really good thing for that. I really do.
Well, I appreciate that, man.
Each other because they shoot CZs or whatever.
Yeah, I wasn't going to. Mark had a comment about that CZP10C. I wasn't going to touch that one. I'll let you address that later. Mark says,
oh, yeah.
Mark says, I use Einstein's quote often in our training, quote, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Wow. Found.
Yeah.
Last question, Jason. I know,
policies, right? There's no systemic thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, man.
Sorry.
We've been on here 2 hours. This is, I promise, going to be the last question for you, man. Thanks for hanging in there with me. When you look at everything going on right now, man, the pandemic, the economy, the new administration, everything that's swirling around us right now, I mean, and you look at your children, I want to ask you, man, what keeps you up nights as a father? when you think about your children's future and the world they're going to inherit, man, what are your thoughts?
So my biggest concern is that America will not be the place where my children can choose the future they want to have. That place is going to be somewhere else. And if it may, so I it may be hard to see that right now, and it might sound like I'm doomsaying, and I'm not. I just feel like there's this sort of cultural eschewing of personal responsibility that certainly gets all the press and has a lot of political momentum behind it. And the part that comes with that, maybe the unintended consequence of a world where you get to be less responsible, is that somebody else, namely the government or a bureaucracy of some sort, takes that responsibility for you. And with that goes options. I was explaining to my daughter as she comes closer to adulthood that the world, when you're born, you have the horizon. Every single degree, you could go in any one of those directions. They're all yours. Decisions you make will limit that, right? Like if you make a bad decision, end up with a felony rap. Now your cone of opportunity shrinks pretty dramatically. So your job, at least until you commit and you find your calling, is to sort of investigate and at least protect those avenues for yourself. And so the only way that works is if people aren't taking them from you actively by babying you into a specific quadrant for your life. And I say babying, and that became connotative. I didn't mean it for that, but my concern is that eventually personal responsibility will be a government feature, entirely government feature, and then aimlessness you won't be able to. It'll be too hard, maybe even illegal, to forge your own path forward. So conflict between the individual and the state is, I guess, if you get to boil it all down, my concern about the future, at least in America, is increased conflict between the individual and the state, and therefore America stops being America at that point. The America, you know. The good news is there are other places in the world that are experiencing democracy, experiencing freedom and personal, the beauty of personal responsibility. Czech Republic or Czechia, I guess, as they are now called, is a great example. But I mean, there was more too. But I looked around. I'm having a hard time finding somebody in my area to teach me how to speak Czech. So I'm just gonna have to speak English from now, and then hope for the best. I guess vote for the best.
Yeah, that's good,
But yeah,
man.
it seems to be upset.
Yeah. Tiny says, great show. Stay aware, stay prepared, simplify, gentlemen. Yeah. Thank you, Tiny.
Fine,
I
man.
appreciate that. Thank you to everybody that joined us today. Thank you. A special thank you to my good friend Jason Brown for coming on the show and sharing with us his life experience. He had a very crazy 4 years in the Marine Corps, did a lot of things, and you have a very mature approach to life and your thoughts, and I really enjoy talking to you, Jason.
Thank you, Rich. I love it too. Anytime. Maybe one of these days I'll get down to Tennessee and you can show me around the farm.
I'd love it, man. Absolutely. Open invite. So thank you, everybody. Any final thoughts, Jason?
No, be kind to each other, right? We're all in this, regardless. Even if we disagree, we're all in this together. We really are. And if we can't find a way on the ground level to start respecting each other while we're changing each other's mind, or presenting each other with enough information to allow people to change their mind, we are fewer and fewer every year. The people who want to be responsible for themselves. There's less of us every year. Now, I have some hope for the future. Kids, I think, are starting to see both sides of the coin they're being handed. But we need to find a way to start being neighbors again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, man. I totally echo that.
It's nothing inspirational.
Yeah. Gerald says, great show. Thanks. Mark says, great show today, gentlemen. Thank you for sharing. Listen, folks, I'm going to remind you one more time, the fight is coming. Be ready.